The early morning sun peeked through the tall glass windows of John F. Kennedy International Airport. Travelers bustled in every direction, rolling suitcases, clutching passports, and sipping their last coffees before boarding. Amid the crowd, Sophia Carter, a 19-year-old girl with brown hair tied into a simple ponytail, walked quietly toward Gate 17. She carried only a small backpack, worn from years of use, and a book on aviation tucked under her arm. Sophia wasn't like most passengers boarding that flight. While others thought about beaches in Miami, family reunions, or business meetings, she thought about airplanes. Ever since she was a child, she had dreamed of becoming a pilot. She had spent hours in flight simulators, practicing takeoffs, landings, and emergency scenarios. Yet for all her passion, she had never sat in the cockpit of a real commercial aircraft. She boarded Flight 726, greeting the flight attendants with a polite smile. Her seat was near the window, somewhere in the middle of the plane. Sophia loved window seats. She loved watching the world shrink below her as the plane lifted into the sky. As she settled in, she put on her headphones and glanced around. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop beside her. A family with 2 little kids sat across the aisle, already juggling toys and snacks. The cabin was alive with chatter, laughter, and the gentle hum of the engines warming up. The captain's voice soon echoed through the cabin. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reynolds, and with me is First Officer Clark. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet with a flight time of about 2 hours and 40 minutes down to sunny Miami. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Applause and cheers came from a few excited passengers. The plane rolled forward, engines roaring as it gained speed. Sophia pressed her forehead against the window, her heart racing with the thrill of takeoff. As the wheels left the ground, the city of New York grew, smaller and smaller, swallowed by the clouds. For the first hour, everything was peaceful. The attendants moved up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks. Children laughed, some passengers read books, others slept. Sophia took out her notebook, sketching an airplane cockpit she had memorized from her simulator training. To her, this was more than just a ride. It was a classroom in the sky. But peace rarely lasts forever. Around the 2-hour mark, Sophia noticed something unusual. The captain's voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't as steady as before. He started saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, then stopped. The sound cut off abruptly. Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin. The plane shook slightly, not violently, but enough to cause a few gasps. Sophia's instincts flared. She knew turbulence. She knew engine sounds. But this felt different. A strange stillness lingered. Afterward, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. Moments later, 2 flight attendants rushed past, their faces pale, whispering frantically to one another. One carried a medical kit. The other pushed open the cockpit door before quickly shutting it again. Passengers began to notice. Anxiety spread like a wave. "What's going on?" whispered the businessman beside Sophia, pulling off his glasses. Sophia, didn't answer. She leaned toward the aisle, watching the attendants. Her chest tightened with unease. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no word from the cockpit. Finally, the head flight attendant, a woman in her late 30s named Michelle, stepped forward with a forced smile. She took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing a small issue in the cockpit, but everything is under control." Her voice trembled slightly on the word control. Passengers exchanged worried looks. A mother hugged her child closer. A man muttered a prayer under his breath. The tension inside the cabin grew heavier by the second. Then the words that no passenger ever wants to hear came over the speaker. Michelle's voice cracked as she announced, "If there is anyone on board with flying experience, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." The air went still. People froze in their seats. The businessman beside Sophia dropped his pen. Somewhere in the back, a child asked loudly, "Mommy, what does that mean?" Sophia's heart pounded. Flying experience. The phrase echoed in her mind. She wasn't a pilot, not officially. She wasn't licensed, but she had logged countless hours in simulators. She knew the instruments, the procedures, the emergency drills. Still, this was a real plane, not a game. The lives of over 100 passengers hung in the balance. She gripped her seat, torn between fear and duty. Her throat went dry. Could she really do it? Could she even try? An elderly man stood up first, shaking his head. "I've flown small planes before," he said nervously to an attendant, "but never something this size." They thanked him, but his voice lacked confidence and he quickly sat back down. Silence returned. No one else moved. And then, against every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden, Sophia slowly rose to her feet. Her legs trembled as she stepped into the aisle. All eyes turned toward her. The businessman stared in shock. The mother clutched her child tighter. Dozens of strangers were suddenly watching this 19-year-old girl, waiting, judging, hoping. I have some experience," she said softly, her voice shaking but audible. "I've trained on simulators. I know the basics of flying." A hush fell across the cabin. One passenger whispered, "She's just a kid." Another muttered, "Is this a joke?" But the attendant's eyes lit up with a fragile spark of hope. "Come with us," Michelle said urgently, motioning her forward. Sophia followed, her knees weak, her palms sweaty. She could feel the weight of every stare on her back as she walked toward the cockpit. Inside her mind, a storm raged. What if I fail? What if I make it worse? What if everyone... She pushed the thought away. When the cockpit door opened, her breath caught. Both Captain Reynolds and First Officer Clark lay slumped in their seats, unconscious, faces pale. Oxygen masks dangled loosely, untouched. The sight was terrifying. Michelle whispered, "Food poisoning." They collapsed minutes apart. We tried, waking them. Nothing works. Sophia swallowed hard, forcing herself into the captain's seat. Her hands hovered over the controls she had studied for years. Only now they were real, glowing, alive. The radio crackled beside her, Miami Control calling desperately for an answer. Her voice trembled as she picked up the headset. This is Sophia Carter. I'm 19. I've trained in simulators but never flown a real aircraft. Please, guide me." The cabin behind her was silent. Hundreds of lives were now resting on her shoulders. And for the first time in her life, Sophia wasn't just dreaming of flying. She was truly in command. The headset felt heavy on Sophia's head. Her palms were slick with sweat as she gripped the controls. Her voice had already gone out across the radio, introducing herself to the world outside the plane. For a moment, there was only static. Then, a calm, steady voice answered. "Flight 726, this is Miami Control. Copy your situation. Sophia, we're here with you. You are not alone. Just breathe." The words soothed her, but only slightly. She glanced at the unconscious pilots, their lifeless figures still strapped into their seats. Every warning light on the dashboard seemed to glare at her, daring her to make a mistake. "Miami Control," she whispered. "I've only flown simulators. I've never done this for real." "Understood," the voice replied gently. "But your training is enough. Listen carefully and follow every instruction. You can do this." Behind her, the flight attendant Michelle stood with wide eyes, wringing her hands. "Do you really think—" she began, but stopped, realizing Sophia had no choice. The first step was regaining control. The autopilot was still engaged, keeping the plane steady at cruising altitude. But autopilot wouldn't last forever. Sophia needed to prove she could hold the controls herself. Okay, Sophia, Miami Control guided. Place your right hand on the yoke, your left on the throttle. Gently ease the yoke back toward you, then release. That's how you'll control. Pitch. Try it slowly. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. The nose of the plane tilted slightly upward, then leveled again. A murmur rose from the passengers in the cabin, feeling the subtle movement. "She's flying it," Michelle whispered in awe. "Good," said the calm voice from the ground. "Now, we're going to prepare for descent. But first, you need to know we're landing this aircraft in Miami. That's the closest safe airport. You'll have to bring her down yourself." Sophia's heart nearly stopped. She had imagined flying all her life, but never landing a real jet filled with people. "Can't someone else?" she began, but stopped. There was no one else. Just her. She closed her eyes for half a second, then whispered, "Tell me what to do." Back in the cabin, the passengers waited in suffocating silence. Fear hung thick in the air. A mother clutched her baby close. A man muttered, "A teenager is flying this thing? We're doomed." Another voice countered, "She's all we've got. Let her try." Some prayed. Others wept quietly. And yet, in that moment, every soul on board shared one fragile thread of hope. One 19-year-old girl who had dared to stand up. Inside the cockpit, the instructions kept coming. "Start reducing your altitude. Pull the throttle back. Slowly. Watch your speed." Her hands shook, but she followed each step. The plane responded, beginning its slow, careful descent. Clouds whipped past the windows. For the first time, Sophia felt the full responsibility of the aircraft beneath her, the weight of lives pressing on her every move. The radio crackled again. Another voice joined in, deeper, more authoritative. "Sophia, this is Captain Harris. I'm a retired airline pilot patched in to guide you. I'll be with you all the way down." Relief flooded her chest. An actual pilot would guide her, but still, she was the one touching the controls. "Okay, Sophia," Captain Harris said, firmly. "We're going to run through your landing checklist. Gear, flaps, throttle, everything. I know you've seen this in simulators. Now, you're going to do it for real." Her fingers hovered over the switches, her breath shallow. She could hear the murmurs of the passengers behind the cockpit door, the fear vibrating through the metal. She thought of her mother back home, who believed her daughter was just taking a normal flight. She thought of her professors who had always said, "You've got potential, Sophia. One day, you'll be a great pilot." Was this that day? 30 minutes passed. Every moment felt like an hour. Sophia adjusted headings, monitored altitude, responded to air traffic control. Each instruction was a test of nerve. Once, when turbulence hit, the plane lurched violently, sending gasps through the cabin. Sophia's grip tightened, fighting to keep control. Her voice cracked. I can't hold." "It's steady!" "Yes, you can," Captain Harris's voice thundered through the radio. "Focus. Don't fight the plane. Feel it. Ease your touch. Trust your training." She steadied her breathing, adjusted gently, and the aircraft leveled out. Applause erupted faintly from the cabin, carried through the door. Michelle, still standing behind her, whispered, "They believe in you." As Miami grew closer, the runway lights twinkled faintly in the distance. Sophia could just make them out through the window, glowing like a promise. "All right, Sophia," Harris instructed, his voice calm but firm. "This is the hard part. You're going to line up with the runway. Lower your landing gear now." Her hand trembled as she flipped the switch. A heavy thump echoed beneath the plane as the wheels descended. Passengers felt it too. Hope flickered. "Good. Now, flaps down. Reduce your speed. Keep her nose steady." The plane shuddered as adjustments took hold. Sophia's heart raced faster than the engines themselves. In the cabin, tension turned unbearable. A little boy whispered, "Is she going to crash us?" His mother stroked his hair, though her own eyes were filled with fear. The descent steepened. Miami Control's voice grew urgent. "Flight 726, you're cleared to land. Sophia, this is it. Stay calm. You're doing great." Her knuckles turned white on the yoke. Sweat rolled down her temple. She whispered to herself, "Come on, Sophia. Don't lose it now." The runway lights grew larger. The ground approached. The engines roared as she tried to balance speed and angle. One wrong move, and everything would end. Passengers gasped as the plane tilted slightly left. Sophia corrected quickly, her breath sharp. The entire cabin felt the correction and went dead silent, as if holding its breath with her. "Almost there," Harris said firmly. "Ease her down, don't fight it. Let the plane land itself." The wheels strained, screaming against the air. Sophia's chest tightened. She was seconds away from the most important moment of her life. And then the screen of dials and flashing lights filled her vision. The runway stretched ahead. The roar of the engines was deafening. This was it. This was the moment between life and death. The ground rushed closer. The runway lights stretched like two glowing lines guiding her path. Sophia's breath came in short, shallow bursts as she gripped the yoke with trembling hands. Every nerve in her body screamed with fear, yet somewhere inside, a quiet determination held her steady. She could not think of herself anymore. 148 lives were waiting for her to succeed. "Steady, Sophia." Captain Harris's voice filled her headset, calm but firm. "You're lined up. Now bring her down gently. Ease the throttle back." Her hand moved to the throttle, slowly pushing it down. The engines softened, the nose of the aircraft dipping ever so slightly. The entire cabin tilted forward. Passengers gasped, clutching armrests, parents pulling children close. A tense silence gripped everyone, each person holding their breath, as if exhaling too loudly might break the fragile control Sophia had over the plane. The main landing gear approached the asphalt. The lights were blinding now, the runway rushing up to meet them. Sophia's heart thundered in her chest. She whispered to herself, "You can do this, just like the simulator, you can do this." The wheels screeched as they hit the ground, a bone-shaking jolt running through the fuselage. The plane bounced once, hard, then came down again, the rubber grinding against the runway. Passengers screamed, thinking they were crashing, but Sophia fought to keep the nose steady. "Hold her! Hold her!" Harris's voice urged. Her grip tightened, muscles burning. The aircraft swayed left, then right, the massive body resisting her shaky hands. Sweat blurred her vision, but she blinked it away, pulling every ounce of focus into those final, desperate seconds. The plane's nose dipped toward the ground. She eased the yoke back, gently, firmly, refusing to panic. The nose gear touched, down with a violent thud, and suddenly the deafening screech of wheels on asphalt filled the cabin. "Throttle to idle! Reverse thrust!" Harris barked. She obeyed instantly, her body moving on instinct. The engines roared again, this time, fighting against the momentum, slowing the aircraft. The runway lights blurred past. Her chest tightened, terrified they would run out of asphalt before the plane stopped. The plane shuddered, brakes grinding, metal groaning. Passengers clutched each other, tears streaming, prayers whispered in every language. The nose of the plane dipped again, rattling as the speed bled away, slower, slower, until at last, the monstrous machine rolled to a stop, resting on the runway. For a moment, there was silence. Pure, heavy silence. Sophia's hands were frozen on the yoke, her chest heaving, her body trembling from head to toe. She couldn't even move. She couldn't believe it. And then, the cabin erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. Strangers hugged each other, weeping with relief. Children clapped their tiny hands, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. A man shouted, "She did it!" and his words rippled through the plane like fire. Michelle, the flight attendant, had tears in her eyes as she leaned against the cockpit door. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You saved us, Sophia." But Sophia couldn't answer. Her eyes blurred with tears, her body sagging with exhaustion. She let go of the controls at last, her hands shaking uncontrollably. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. The radio crackled one final time. Harris's voice, full of pride, spoke softly. "Well done, Sophia. You just landed a commercial aircraft on your very first try. You're a hero today." On the ground, emergency vehicles rushed toward the plane, their lights flashing red and blue against the night. Paramedics boarded quickly, pulling the unconscious pilots from their seats and rushing them to stretchers. But the cameras, the reporters, the airport staff, all eyes turned to the young girl still seated in the cockpit, trembling in disbelief. When she finally stepped out into the cabin, the passengers rose to their feet. They clapped, they cheered. Some reached out to touch her shoulder as she walked by. The little boy who had asked if she would crash them stared at her with wide, awestruck eyes. His mother whispered, "This girl just gave you your tomorrow." Sophia's cheeks burned with emotion, overwhelmed by the sea of gratitude. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She was just a student, just a girl who loved airplanes. Yet in that moment, she had become something far greater. By the time the passengers disembarked, reporters were already at the terminal, cameras flashing. Headlines were being written before she had even stepped off the tarmac. 19-year-old lands plane saves over 100 lives. Her name would be on every screen, her picture on every front page. But for Sophia, none of that mattered. What mattered were the faces of the people stepping off the plane, alive because she had refused to give in to fear. That night, as she finally sat in a quiet corner of the airport, exhaustion washing over her, she thought of her mother. She imagined the call she would make. "Mom, you won't believe what happened. I landed a plane." Her lips curled into a faint, weary smile. She had dreamed of being a pilot her whole life, and now the world knew she was ready. For the passengers of Flight 726, Sophia Carter was no longer just a teenager chasing dreams. She was the girl who had held their lives in her trembling hands and brought them safely home. She was the reason they would see their families again. The reason children would hug their parents that night. The reason every passenger could wake up the next morning. In their eyes, she wasn't just a student anymore. She was a hero.